Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today, I would like to talk about Terry Pratchet and his Discworld series and some other stuff that he's written. I don't recall if I ever did a thing about this before. I know I must have thought about it, and people maybe asked me. I know I had some questions like, Greg, what kind of stuff do you have on your bookshelf? And I've got a lot of old textbooks. I mean, like, you never know when I might need to brush up on the fundamentals of thermodynamics again. So far, never. But I've got that textbook in case I ever need that. But yeah, otherwise, there's a ton of Terry Pratchett books on my bookshelf because I'm a big fan of his work. Unfortunately, he passed away not long ago. I can't recall if it was last year or this year. It's pretty recent. But he wrote a lot of satire, is what he did. Is he would write this sort of fantasy, like it was based on like the emerging, it was the industrial era, but in a magical fantasy setting where like dragons and magic and other things are all kind of real. And so the Discworld series is just sort of this very charming satirical setting, mostly based in the city of what they call Ankh-Morpork, which is like a small city-state, but it's the most powerful place in the world because it's just incredibly it's basically the center of the Industrial Revolution, and nowhere else has caught up to it yet. So nowhere else is really like producing stuff quite as well as Ankh-Morpork is. Ankh-Morpork is like this sort of melting pot of different cultures. People come in from all over the world to look for jobs in Ankh-Morpork, and of course the place is horribly polluted as well. There used to be a river that flowed through Ankh-Morpork, but now he jokes about it. The river is more solid. You can actually walk on the river. It's so horribly polluted. It's kind of a miserable place. It's a terrible place. There's poverty and sadness and all sorts of things, but it's also kind of an amazing place. There's tons of opportunities. I mean, it sort of depends on where you are in life. There's lots of really bad places. Like, for example, if you live in the Shades, there's a really high probability that you are either a mugger or you are a muggee. There's really not any other kind of there's no other kind of occupations that you can have. But he also does really good character writing, Terry Pratchett does. I mean, one of the things that's so fun about his books is that he really kind of nails down sort of the peculiarities of just human behavior. I mean, like, most of his stories, he'll have kind of like chosen ones and heroes, but they won't be like extraordinary individuals. What they'll be is some kind of like, they'll be like really ordinary people who would rather stay at home, or they'll be like really pedantic workaholics, and they'll come along and like they'll just be kind of irritated with the bureaucratic structure. They find it very efficient, and they'll find some loose thread in the structure, and they'll tug on it, and pretty soon they tug on this thread, and like the whole sweater of society kind of comes unraveled, and they're just kind of like looking around and this came undone. And so the whole book is about them trying to figure out how to repair the damage they just did to the sweater by tugging at this little thread, or something to that effect. I mean, it kind of varies. He touches on a lot of different social subjects. One of my favorite things that he does is he has these dwarves, right? And there are a couple books that explain a lot about dwarven society within the Discworld book series. And in Terry Pratchett's Discworld, what the dwarves are is they're just now starting to sort of leave a very conservative cultural mindset, but mostly just in Ankh-Morpork. The way that dwarven society has worked for thousands of years is they live underground, and you can't tell genders apart. I mean, they all wear beards, they all wear lots of protective gear, carry around axes, helmets. Their bread is so stale that you can kill people with it. They eat rats with ketchup. That's a dwarven delicacy right there. But rules are very strict. Societal rules are very strict among the dwarves. Because when you live deep underground, I mean, like, cave-ins are always a danger. If you hit a gas pocket, there's a high probability of explosions. So there's a lot of rules about the way that dwarves kind of have to behave and live. There's so many dwarf laws, and a lot of them are just based in tradition. And they're things like you just don't question. Because when you have stuff like don't wear a candlelight lantern, like they like in this part of like some of these rules, like if you question them, you get killed really easily. I mean, it's just very dangerous living so far underground. So they have very strict, very staunch rules. But a lot of dwarves are kind of packing up and they're moving to the city Ankh-Morpork. And Ankh-Morpork is a little bit different. There are still dwarves that dig deep underground in Ankh-Morpork. They have a book that explains where they actually kind of are developing their own underground society. But a lot of dwarves, what they do is they'll set up shops above ground, and they're excellent smiths, you know, and things like that. And they get involved in this industrial stuff, like they make printing presses and things like that. They start to produce a lot of industrial stuff, and they're working more above ground, and they're kind of integrating with humans and things like that. And so there's one book where they have a character named Cheery Littlebottom. That's the character's original name, Cheery. And later on, she changes her name to Cherry. It's a female dwarf, and dwarfs, like I say, they're impossible to differentiate in terms of gender just by looking. Not even dwarves can actually tell each other apart. What they do is they form romance based on, like, if they become really close friends, you know, and they really like each other, and they spend a lot of time, you know, oh, good lads, they go out drinking, you know, great business partners and things like that. Then they, you know, at one point they awkwardly ask each other, like, are you a lady dwarf? And if one of them goes, you know, one of them gets, and they cough, and they say, yeah, I'm a lady dwarf. And they say, oh, that's fantastic, I'm a man dwarf. And, you know, that's what they need to form a union. They get dwarf married and then have dwarf babies and never speak of what they had to go through to have these children. It's very taboo, very forbidden. Yeah, so they don't like display their genders. It's considered awkward. Part of that is because they feel like all dwarves are equal. I mean, like every dwarf has got to be, you know, you work on the mines, you're part of your society, every dwarf is equal. They really didn't like this idea that dwarves should be different based on their genders, that they should be, they you know, like, they complain about it. They're like, oh, you know, it'll lead to discriminate. Like, pretty soon you'll know which dwarves are which, and they'll start acting differently around each other. It's just terrible. It's a terrible idea. They don't think that dwarves should be able to dress differently based on the gender. But Cheery Littlebottom, Cherry kind of wants to sort of be more like the humans, and so this particular book actually wasn't about Cherry and what she wanted. I can't remember what it was about. I think it was about there was like a murder. It was a murder mystery book, but Cherry was kind of going through these things, and she was a cop. She's like a police officer. Terry Pratchet loves to write about Ankh-Morpork's police. He's got probably most of his books have to do with Commander Samuel Vimes and his run of the Watch. But anyway, though, so part of that book was Cherry sort of trying to express herself as a female dwarf in spite of the taboos against it. And so, like, they'd be going around the book, they'd be talking about, like, this murder or whatever, and they'd be like, oh, so-and-so did this, and, yeah, we found this thing. And come in like, Cherry, where's our like, because Cherry was their chemical expert. She was, like, their forensic scientist. And so they'd be like, Cherry, you know, tell us what you found out about this thing. And, like, they'd come in and, like, Cherry would have makeup on. And, like, dwarves just didn't wear makeup. It was almost completely unheard of. So they'd walk in and, Cherry would have a bunch of makeup on. Like, Cherry would be wearing lipstick. And they'd come in and they'd be like, Cherry, what do the results say about the forensic science? And then Cherry would be like, oh, sorry, well, what I found out was, you know, so this was kind of like what happened is there were other dwarves, though, that were also part of the Watch. And so then Cherry got in a few scuffles while she was on the Watch, and so it was kind of about her reconciling, you know, business and her standing and whatnot within her job as she tried to express herself more as a female. She wore I think a chainmail kilt or something like that, and to be a little bit more sexy, she made it to where the chainmail kilt was just a little bit higher, and so you could see her ankles, you could see a little bit of dwarf skin. And the dwarves, they thought it was scandal. There was all kinds of gossip around the Watch, and they're just like, oh, you know, I can see her ankles. Like, what's society coming to these days? And so some of the dwarves liked it, you know. They were like, I kind of like that I can see at ankles. And then another dwarf approached Cherry, and Cherry got, like, angry because she thought that this dwarf was going to come up and, like, hit on her. Because it was like, so here you're female. But it turned out it was another female dwarf. And she was like, so how'd you get that to come up a little bit? And so she kind of wanted this other female dwarf kind of wanted to dress a little bit like Cherry. Like, she thought that was rather fetching. And she kind of liked that some of the guys, like, because they all talk amongst themselves. They don't know which genders are which. And so some of the male dwarves were like, you know, I kind of like it. And so some of the other female dwarves were like, oh, you know, maybe more females could dress like that. That's not so bad. And, you know, so Ankh-Morpork is sort of going through a bit of a cultural revolution with the dwarves. But like I say, there's pushback because a lot of dwarves are still living underground and they're still kind of following all these rules. It's still very important. You know, so it's sort of kind of a fun satire on the way that people kind of go through cultural changes, but all from the perspective of this fantasy race that's just this very staunch stereotypical fantasy race. It's very stereotypical because of all these reasons that Terry Pratchett comes up with that are based kind of on the way their society works. They have a whole episode where they go off to the Dwarven lands where everybody is much more conservative. Everybody still works in the mines and stuff like that. And they talk to the king. And there's all kinds of political discussion about, like, should we make it illegal for them to show their ankles and things like that? Because dwarves are going to Ankh-Morpork and they make a little bit of money and they come home and they've still got these ideals about, female dwarves should be able to be female now. And so it's just kind of creating these cultural burdens. But even that book, when they go to the Dwarven city, it wasn't really the focus so much. This is kind of what I really like about it, is it's always he has a lot of commentaries about society, but the core of the books are always really based around something else. When they went to the Dwarven lands and they met with the king and they found out all these people were kind of irritated about this, the conservative stuff versus the more, social progressive, it was actually about a political spat between the king of werewolves and the king of the dwarves. As they had some political thing that was going on. Somebody had died, and they thought that maybe somebody had orchestrated the death, and some, like, because an artifact had gone missing, and they were trying to find it. Or I think that what they eventually did is they just produced a forgery and then pretended that they found the artifact, and everybody just believed it. Like that was kind of how they resolved the whole thing. Another bit of satire in society there. But it was just kind of a fascinating, just a fun, fascinating author. He writes a lot of the same characters a lot. So this was one problem. I used to try to get my I've had 2 girlfriends now who I've tried to get into these books, and both of them really quickly lost interest. It was so disappointing, because I would introduce them to the book, and they'd be like, well, they just keep dropping all these names, and I have no idea who any of these people are. And the reason that happens is because Terry Pratchett will write the same characters over and over and over again. So there's like half of his books, or maybe not half, but a lot of his books involve the Watch and the people on the Watch. So you get to know these different people, like Cherry, Cherry, or Sergeant Detritus, or Nobbs, Corporal Nobbs, Sergeant Corporal Nobbs' friend, the sergeant I can't remember his name. It slipped my mind. It's the sergeant. He never sees his wife because he works nights and his wife works days, and they think that's a wonderful agreement. Sergeant something. I don't know. They're all charming characters. This really bugs me. I should really know this character. He's like a staple of the. Anyway, Corporal Carrot. They change. They become like Corporal Captain. They actually, throughout the series of the books, they change their positions, and the Watch expands. And this is the trouble with the books, is if you're just trying to get into them, you might read like one late in the series, and the Watch is already huge, and there's already like a ton of different characters. And you'll find that Angua, who is Carrot's, there's a character named Carrot, and he's got a girlfriend named Angua, and she's a werewolf. And Angua's kind of funny, is that she really loves this guy Carrot, but Carrot is like really nice and really patient, and Angua really likes that about him, but she also really kind of hates it about him, because she'll get in these, she'll get down on herself sometimes, and she'll get to think like, Carrot will be mad about this, and he's never mad about anything. Like, he always just kind of understands, and it just pisses her off, because once or twice she just wants to, like, have him be wrong or something like that. Like, she every now and then she has these sort of doubts and things, and just he never lives up to her doubts, and this is irritating for her. So you'll have like Angua going on about her relationship with Carrot, and if you haven't really read any of the prior books where they've established much of the relationship, it'll still kind of make sense. I mean, you could follow the logic, but you won't have seen any of the build-up to where Angua has gone from, like they've built their relationship in past books and have kind of grown to this point where now Angua is not sure if she really wants to be in the relationship, but she really likes him, and she knows that Carrot's great, and so she kind of doesn't want to leave him, but she also kind of does, like, she just has her doubts about it, and she wants him to sort of justify the doubts, so maybe she could leave, like it gets into that sort of thing. But the core characters that you see more than anything else are Sergeant Vimes is always a really big guy. He's the leader of the Watch, of the police of Ankh-Morpork. And there are tons of different books. Like, Sergeant Vimes goes on so many different ridiculous quests throughout the series. There's one where he time travels. Like, there's actually a time travel plot where I can't remember how it is that he gets sucked back in time, but he goes backwards in time and then becomes the leader of the Watch back when he was a kid. Like, when he was a teenager and he first joined the Watch, like, he remembered that he had this sergeant or whatever that he really looked up to. He just loved this guy. And what it turns out is that it was Vimes who goes back in time and he becomes his own sergeant. And so he mentors himself. And that was why Vimes liked that sergeant so much, was because Vimes went back in time. And they didn't look alike because Vimes had been through so much by then. Like, he had scars and he'd put on some weight and he was just a much older guy. They didn't look alike anymore. And so that was kind of this amusing thing. And so, like, Vimes just really looks up to himself. He's just so impressed with like, oh, he's so much more wisdom, you know what you're doing. And so Vimes keeps telling him, like, all these really straightforward, very practical things, like stuff that you'll really appreciate. And he just speaks to Vimes on this perfect level because he knows exactly what Vimes is thinking. He can just get into Vimes' head. So there's a whole series there's a whole book where he goes back in time and he trains himself, somewhat. And it's kind of funny because you see his frustration with his younger self, where, like, when he's younger, he's still really idealistic. He hasn't, like, become jaded enough towards all these rules. Like, there's a lot of rules about cowardice within the Watch because a lot of people in Ankh-Morpork are armed. And so if you chase after a criminal, like, there's a lot, like, never chase after a criminal by yourself, because the criminal may be running across the corner where his friends are waiting, because they set up ambushes and stuff for the police. Like, they know the police will come. So what, like, one guy will do is he'll rob somebody, run down the corner, and when the cop chases him down the corner, you'll get ambushed. And there'll be, like, 6 guys on one, and pretty much that cop is dead. So there's all kinds of rules, and Vimes knows them really well, and so he just gets upset with himself, his younger self, so often, because his younger self will do things like chase that one guy around the corner and then nearly get himself killed, and it's just, like, so upsetting because he's not only trying to protect some kid, he's trying to protect himself from getting killed. So Vimes is just this really interesting character because he's in so many different books and he does so many different things, and eventually what he does is he marries into he gets involved with some really complex stuff, and this woman named Sybil falls in love with him. And Sybil actually comes from the very wealthy Ramkin family, and the Ramkins are actually not all that politically involved anymore, mostly because they all died. I mean, they were a very militaristic family, and so what's kind of amusing about this is that the really militaristic parts of the family, they all went off to war and they sort of died off. And so Sybil's kind of all that remains, and Sybil is, like, a very big, very well-built, she's a very kind of powerfully built woman. And what she does now is she takes care of dragons, like little dragons. There's like a small species of dragons that you can keep, and they eat charcoal, and you can use them to light stuff, or they spit very hot fire. So you can sort of raise them and breed them and sell them off, and people can use them for things. And so she keeps care of these little dragons. It's a very expensive thing to do, but she's very wealthy. And so Vimes gets involved with there's a large dragon attack, and so Vimes is in the Watch. He's trying to keep the peace, and so he gets involved with Sybil, and he comes to her and he's like, so tell me about dragons, and so he and Sybil kind of fall in love, and it's a bit because she's got that military background, and the police thing is sort of like domestic military in a way. They wear the breastplates, they're constantly off on duty and doing all these different things. So she sort of falls in love with him, and they get married. And so Sam winds up as part of this very wealthy family with political ties that have kind of gone defunct a little bit. But once Sybil gets married to him, suddenly the patrician, Lord Vetinari, starts to call on Vimes all the time and wants to have him come in and deal with more and more political scuffles. Because as the Watch grows and the Watch becomes kind of more influential on the way that the city develops, Vimes keeps getting called in to handle diplomacy and politics and run PR and things like that. And it's like, well, you're part of the Ramkin family, you're very wealthy, you're well connected, you've got a coat of arms, this is really important. And Sam just hates the bureaucracy. He doesn't really want to be involved in the politics very much. He just wants to do his police work and make sure that everything is running like clockwork around the police, and make sure that everybody is like doing things that won't get them killed, and so on and so forth. So he starts to get involved in a lot of political scuffles. Like, you find out that there's all kinds of high corruption within politics, and every time Sam gets involved, of course, the only thing he ever wants to do is crack down on the corruption and figure out who's stealing from who, and then arrest everybody. He really just kind of wants to arrest people. This is sort of what Sam Vimes does, and the patrician is portrayed as this very clever, very manipulative guy. He was a former assassin back in his day. In fact, I think that he killed his predecessor, or one of his predecessors, the patrician just before him, or something like that, or the one after. He was an assassin back in the day, but these days he functions as a tyrannical leader. But he's very clever, and he knows that Sam will do this. So what he does is he keeps inviting Sam to get involved in politics whenever he knows that things are kind of greasy, and when his opponents start to get a little bit, they get a little bit blustery, they start going around. They're like, well, I'm going to start to do this, and I'm going to overthrow the patrician. And so all that Vetinari does is he just brings in Sam, and he goes like, oh, hey, Sam, you should get involved in politics with these guys. I hear that they... And he does it so, in such a noble way. He's like, I hear that they're working really hard to better society, and I feel like, as a part of the Ramkin family, Sam, you ought to get involved with these people. And so Sam's really bitter about it. He gets to be really grumpy. And so they throw him in with these politicians who are planning all this evil. And so Sam just pretty soon, he's just arrested everybody. Like, he just gets mad, he arrests everybody, okay. He kind of does this all on his own. So he becomes kind of a way of stamping out corruption while consolidating Vetinari's power. Which you could argue that Vetinari himself is also corrupt, but the way that he plays his game is so complex that it kind of winds up being, I don't know. You can't really say that Vetinari is a good guy or a bad guy. He's just an insanely clever politician. This is sort of fascinating. A lot of people really like Vetinari as a character. Like I say, most of the stories revolve around Vimes, but he's done a couple other things. He's got another character named Moist von Lipwig, and what this guy is he's a former con man based on a real con man, the guy who sold the Brooklyn Bridge twice. Not von Lipwig. It's a similar name. It's a similar sounding name. I used to know this guy. It's one of my books. He sold the Eiffel Tower, too. Maybe he didn't sell a bridge, but he sold the Eiffel Tower. It was, I talked about this guy in a video once. But he was a real con man. There was a real con man with kind of a similar sounding name who sold the Eiffel Tower to a big businessman. What he did is he called up this businessman and he's like, oh, Paris can't afford to keep the Eiffel Tower anymore. We're going to tear it down and sell all the iron to try and turn a quick profit. And so this business mogul was like, oh, yes, I want to get in on this. And so he offered a bid, and so Moist von Lip, I don't know the name. So bad with names. But anyway, so this con man, he meets with him and he takes all the money, and then he just runs off with all the money. And what he did was he made it look like a bribe, the whole thing was really shady. And so what the con man did is he goes, oh, well, if you bribe me, I might let you have this contract. And so this businessman, he thinks, that's why he goes, oh, that's why it's so shady, because we're doing something illegal. So assuming that he was the one who is cleverly breaking the law to get an advantage, he just gives all his money to this con man. So the con man goes, oh, thanks, I just don't get paid enough doing my job. So he takes all the money and it's all cash. He takes all the bribe money and just runs off, and that's it. So this businessman is just screwed. He almost got caught when he tried to do this a second time, and it turned out the business was a little bit more honest. He was like, oh, I just need a little bit of bribe money. And they wouldn't give it to him. They actually reported him. And that's when officials showed up, and they were like, we're not selling the Eiffel Tower. And good that you told us about the bribe thing. So the dishonest guys got screwed, and he's a little bit of a folksy hero in that way. I mean, this original con man did other things that were not so noble. But stuff like that made him a little bit of a folk hero back in his day. God, I wish I could remember his name. He got caught because his girlfriend got mad at him one day. He got in a fight with his girlfriend, so she just went to the police and ratted him out. That was how he got caught. They put him in Alcatraz. But anyway, Moist von Lipwig, though, he's Moist von Lipwig. He's based on this actual con man who really existed. And what he does is he winds up, he gets caught. He gets arrested for some similarly simple thing. It was just he was going great, everybody fell for things. And what he tends to do is he follows the sort of folksy hero angle of the con man thing, where he swindles swindlers. What he'll do is he'll concoct some sort of story where things will look shady and it'll be really obviously shady, but he's playing a bit of a shell game with people. And so he'll make it look like he's getting robbed, or he's getting ripped off, or they're, you know, oh, you're ripping off the government, or we're taking bribes or whatever. And as he's doing the shell game, you know, you get these dishonest people who go, oh yeah, okay, you know, I'll go with it. And they follow this philosophy that this particular con man had, which I believe it was either him or Yellow Kid Weil, who used to say that a dishonest man is the easiest man to con, because a dishonest man thinks he's smarter than everybody else and never stops to think about whether or not he's being screwed himself. So that's sort of what this guy does, is he just takes advantage of crooks. So they finally arrest him, though. They arrest Moist van Lipwig based on some really minor thing, and they're going to hang him. So what Veterinari does is he calls the guy in and he offers him a pardon, and he goes, you know what, I might let you go back into society if you run the mail service. And Moist van Lipwig is just like, you know, what? Like, and he goes, yeah, you know, the mail service is horribly inadequate. If you can repair the mail service by the end of the year, I will let you live. And so, you know, so this con man just like, I was like, oh, okay, so it's death or fix your mail service? Okay, I'll try to fix the mail service. So what he does is he gets into the mail service and he starts to come up with all these like clever PR schemes to get people interested in sending mail again. Because what's happened is, like, the telegraph company has really taken over the whole thing, but there's only one telegraph company. They're a monopoly, and their monopoly, it's getting more and more expensive to send telegraphs, and people can't really afford to do it. I mean, it's starting to get to be a racket, and the mail service is totally defunct. So really, there's no competition. People can't, you can't. Basically, they're facing a really huge problem. With this monopoly is causing so much financial damage to the people in general, and there's nothing competing, that it's all getting to be screwed. So Moist comes in, and his job winds up being to sort of revive the mail service to compete with the telegraph company again. But he's also got to figure out a way to convince people, through if nothing else, just being a con artist, that the mail service is equally efficient to what they call the clacks, the telegraph service. So the whole book is really kind of amusing. It's just like all these tricks and little shell games that he plays to make it seem like the mail service is just this really interesting, fascinating, like, quality commodity. And it's always been there, and it fell out of vogue because it really wasn't that fascinating. But like, they start doing things like they start printing custom stamps and stuff like that, and they run these limited run stamps. And so people start collecting, like, he starts stamp collecting in this way. People kind of take an interest in, like, well, how long are you going to run these stamps? It's like, oh, I don't know, for like a week. And they're like, only a week? I got to keep some of these. So stamps become really valuable. And this actually leads into the next book with Moist van Lipwig, is that Veterinari shows up and he goes, you know, you did a fantastic job. You've revived the post office. How about you fix the banking system? And so he's just like, he goes, how about I do what? And so he moves him over to the banking system. And so then you've got this con man in the banking system. And the whole time it all kind of works, because if he screws up, or if he does something the patrician doesn't like, then he'll just be executed. So it's kind of like he's got just death looming over him, and he can't screw around and like cheat everybody. He's got to actually just fix the banking system in a way that like he's convinced that Veterinari is keeping a close enough eye that he can't get away with swindling. So then you get into this sort of thing where they're transitioning over to paper money, and they're trying to figure out how do we convince people that, because what they're using is the gold standard originally, where they're printing all their coins out of like gold and copper and silver and everything else. And so he's trying to convince everybody, like, well, we could just switch over to paper, and the paper would just say how much money is worth, and everyone would be like, but there's no value in paper. Like, and like, well, if we print really beautiful pictures on them, then people will think that maybe the pictures themselves have value. So they get like an artist and they start using the printing press to make this. And so then he's got to run his con stuff to try and convince everybody that the gold is not as good as the paper. Like, he's got to convince everybody, he's got to be a con artist and con everyone into thinking that paper is just as valuable as the gold. So the whole like transitioning off of the gold standard is all just sort of it's like a lot of hoodwinking. And what's really funny about all the con artist stuff that he does is, in the end, it's better for everybody because society runs more efficiently. I mean, it's kind of like the way that we function now, but it's all kind of like to get everybody to accept the change. He's got to sort of change their way of thinking, and he's got to do it using the beliefs that they already have, more or less. And this is what was really fascinating about the way that he writes these books. Is like I say, Terry Pratchett is very in touch with the way that people function. So when he writes about his social commentary, you know, he doesn't, I mean, one of the things that I absolutely hate these days, you see all over Tumblr and on like certain webcomics and stuff like that, where they write about social commentary, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to like set up who's the villain and who's the good guy, and they say like everybody who disagrees with me is evil, and they're evil on purpose, and what we need to do is we need to kill people who are evil, you know, and they just kind of come up with this really easy, very blunt, like just dumbheaded sort of approach, and it's really not very insightful. But what Terry Pratchett would write is these sort of things where it's sort of like everybody is just very everybody-ish, you know, like people are just kind of like people. And so you would have these changes, and it was like, well, if you want everybody to accept the change, then you have to continue to do everything the same in sort of a way. But, you know, the same but different. And so Moist von Lipwig's his careers and his schemes were all about convincing everybody to change over to a new way of doing things without really feeling like they had actually changed. You know, like they still felt like, you know, the paper money was worth something. And this was actually something, this happened as they find out that that the bank has actually been kind of corrupt for quite a while, and that they've been the bank has been running on a deficit for ages, and that there's basically no money left in the bank, because the cost of making these gold coins, like $1 costs like, you know, $10 to make or something like that, and then a penny costs like $15 to make, and they're like, why does a penny cost $15 to make? And they're like, well, we have to do all this engraving, you know. So they're kind of doing this, and so they find out that the bank, which has been printing money, is actually running at a deficit because it costs more to make the money than it does than the money is worth. And so it's kind of like this weird, just strange system. So they've got to convince everyone that the paper money is worth as much as the gold is worth, because the bank actually doesn't have any money, and so the whole thing is just all about kind of convincing society to keep doing things the way that they have without the system collapsing, because if everybody believes in it, the system works, and if everybody didn't believe in it, they would all run to the bank and try to withdraw their money, and there would be no money in the bank, and the system would collapse. So it's kind of just very strange, very interesting. But like I say, Discworld, Terry Pratchett's a fun writer. If you don't really want to get into Discworld, another one that I recommend actually is, this is conveniently here, Good Omens. And this was a jointly written book between Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman is also a very popular writer. That one's actually a satire on the apocalypse. This doesn't have all the characters and whatnot, so you get introduced to all the characters, you know, throughout the book, and it's a little bit less confusing. You have less of a chance of jumping in and not knowing what's going on or not knowing the characters. But Discworld, it's a fun series. It's a really good series. Good Omens is a good book if you just want to kind of have jokes on religion and life and stuff like that. And like I say, it's not, none of his stuff is ever like condemning or judgmental. It's all very just kind of like people are as people are, and things change, and they change for reasons. And there's not really a right or wrong, because if you look at both sides of the argument, everybody's kind of right for their own perspective. You know, but it's comedy as well, so it's kind of like amusing. When it's all like, when you look at societal change through the lens of a bunch of grumpy dwarves, you know, it becomes a lot easier to laugh at. So, yes, so Terry Pratchett, very good author. I'm very big fan of his work. Very sad that he passed away. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and yes, and then passed away. But well-loved artist by a lot of different people. Very highly recommended, I think. But anyway, I suppose that'll be it for today, so I will catch you guys later.